Moving right along to yet another segment on some dark history of counterculture. Here is The Family by Ed Sanders, the story of Charles Manson's Dune Buggy Attack Battalion. This was originally published, this edition, as I've mentioned in previous videos, I always try to find, if at all possible, the first edition. And I prefer hardback. Just as a book aficionado, I prefer hardback books. This was originally published in this, I believe, is the first edition, and published in 1971. And one of the reasons I was really seeking out the first edition of this particular book was there were rumors floating around that his mentions of the Process Church and its connections to the Manson family had to be removed from the early publications because it and all subsequent publications or editions because of threats of lawsuits from the Process Church. So the Process Church, for the uninitiated, is a really dark, bizarre religious cult organization, whatever you want to call it, that has a really strange theology of Satan and Jesus working together to bring about the end times. It's a really apocalyptic, kind of a death cult mentality. And it's definitely worth looking into. If you're into any of this kind of stuff, looking up the Process Church will definitely open your eyes to a lot of that ideology underpinning a lot of some of the weirder things that happen. So, interesting aside, I hate to get off on too much of a rabbit trail here, but the Process Church later changed their name, and you can verify this on the very CIA, NSA friendly Wikipedia. The Process Church changed their name after a lot of bad press to the Best Friends Animal Society. So they are now headquartered out of a ranch or a compound, whatever you want to call it, out of southern Utah. So anyway, but they now go by the very, very PR savvy name of Best Friends Animal Society, because why not? So anyway, back to Ed Sanders, The Family. This was one of the original books written on the Manson murders, and just one of the most thorough breakdowns, especially for the day, of all of the connections Manson had, all of his activities within the subculture in the 60s, early rock era, and his connections, most importantly, to a lot of high-ranking people in the music industry and Hollywood and so forth. So Ed Sanders did a great job of really breaking that down. And one of the, if you haven't looked into this subject, this is a great book. My only complaint with Ed Sanders is his writing style is, for this book anyway, is definitely right out of the 70s. He uses a lot of lingo and a lot of jargon that will drive you nuts, as some of it is, and I realize that a lot of that's how people talked in 1971, but some of it can be a little frustrating to read. Some of you may disagree completely with me on that, but some of that was a little irritating. But overall, great book and great thorough treatment of the Manson murders, and again, all of the connections and a lot of the kind of look behind the curtain at the possible motivations of some of the murders. And he doesn't really get into too much of that. He leaves a lot of this open to speculation, but just showing that there was a lot of drug deals going on. There was a lot more complicated situation than just the Manson family, as they were called, going out and murdering people for the fun of it. So a lot of the helter-skelter view was really kind of a smokescreen to hide much more prosaic organized criminal activities like drug dealing and assassinations and things. So, and that's where this ties into Maury Terry's The Ultimate Evil, because a lot of what he uncovered with Charles Manson is very similar to what later Maury Terry turned up on the East Coast with Roy Radin and the Son of Sam connections. So definitely worth looking into. I'll leave you with this without getting into, because there's a lot of good material in this. This is definitely one of those must-have books if you're into researching Charles Manson, and especially just any of the late 60s counterculture movement, and just to see who knew who and all the connections. This is also required reading as a kind of a prerequisite for really appreciating the book Chaos, which I'll link at the end of this video. I'll link Chaos and Ultimate Evil that I've reviewed previously, because Chaos that was published in 2019. And that's a great follow-up to this, a more updated version with even more further connections with the Manson family. So one of the interesting things, just to give you a kind of an idea of one of the crazier things that I found in this, that I found really strange, and strange is probably putting it very mildly, was Manson ran around Southern California with a whole entourage of young women, and some guys, but predominantly young women. And this guy was a convicted felon, spent extensive time in prison, had quite the rap sheet on him, and yet Angela Lansbury, yes, that Angela Lansbury, had a daughter who was, I think, around 14 or 15 at the time. And she actually had legal papers typed up for her daughter to carry with her so she could hang out with Manson. And if they ever encountered law enforcement, she could produce these documents to show that she, although a minor, was okay to had her parents' consent to be hanging out with Charles Manson. So make of that what you will, but there's obviously some very strange things afoot and very bizarre connections with the Manson family and the Hollywood and music elite. So yeah, definitely worth digging into there and seeing all those connections, especially with the Beach Boys. That some of that will really surprise you. And then, of course, after Charles Manson was arrested and the family was arrested, everybody scattered and was like, Charles who? So anyway, good book, important history, and allegedly, and this is a big allegedly, I'm trying to remember where I read this, because it was fairly recently that I read that Ed Sanders had planned on a follow-up book to this called The Motive. So there was the family and then The Motive. And The Motive was obviously going to focus on what he speculated was, in fact, the motive for the various Manson family murders. And he stopped after death threats. And I think it was a fellow journalist or someone who asked him, "Hey, why did you bail on the Motive book?" And he said, "Ask Mr. Folger, the Folger's Coffee family patriarch." And allegedly he believed there was some connection, that the Folger family had some role in that, or some reason to have benefited from that in some way, because Abigail Folger, of course, was one of the victims of with Sharon Tate. She was at the Tate house the night of the murders and was one of the victims. So anyway, any of you who have words of wisdom on that, I'd love to hear. I also have some other books on the Manson case, but this is definitely, this one and Chaos are by far the best ones. So and this one I believe does mention the process briefly in it, but the process did a bang-up job of going through and threatening legal action against anyone connecting their organization to a lot of organized criminal activity in the late 60s, early 70s. So definitely an interesting little thread to pull at, because a lot of stuff starts coming unraveled. So there you go, The Family by Ed Sanders from 1971.